Welcome to Maximizing Missions. I'm your host, Carl Richard. Thank you for watching today. You know, I believe that missions is the heartbeat of God. Maximizing Missions is a platform that missionaries, ministers, and others can use to share their mission, their ministries, and their stories through a podcast conversation. I am so honored to share this time with you. John Stout said, "We must be global Christians with a global vision because our God is a global God." In today's episode, I want to talk with you about the nation of South Africa, but specifically the ministry of Spirit Wind International and the work that they are doing primarily in the nation of South Africa. According to Operation World, the nation of South Africa has a population of over 59 million people. It includes 65 distinct people groups and 11 different languages spoken between all of them. Spirit Wind International serves South Africa by providing the gospel through humanitarian work such as feeding the hungry, providing clothes. Spirit Wind also, they train leaders in churches in how to become part of their communities. Joining us for this episode is Dr. John Bosman, the founder and president of Spirit Wind International. So, Pastor, welcome today, and thank you so much for joining me today on Maximizing Missions.
Thank you very kindly, Carl. What a delight to be with you. I'm absolutely honored and thrilled to share this time with you.
For those of you that may not understand this relationship, we go back 30 plus years. I was a young kid that didn't really understand anything about ministry, graduated from Bible school with a heart bigger than Dallas and a passion, and wasn't sure what to do with that. And Pastor Bosman pastored actually my home church. And so he picked me up as a young kid, and we worked together for 12, 14 years, something like that. So it is my honor, truthfully, to have you today, and thank you for sharing. So Pastor Bosman, tell me about Spirit Wind Ministry. How did it begin? How did God drop that in your heart? And what are some things that you guys are doing today, not just in the nation of South Africa, but really around the world?
Well, thank you for that opportunity, because it is really important to realize that when my wife and I and our two sons came to the United States in 1986, we never came with the idea to pastor a church. We came to establish a mission base so that we can really come from South Africa to America to do mission work here and take missions back to South Africa. Our intention was never really to pastor a church, as we ultimately then did. We came with the intention of bringing a connection between the two countries and sharing in missions ideas. So when we came to that point in our ministry as pastors of the church, God kind of reminded me, after I'd been pastoring now for 15 years, your actual mission was not this. And there was a stirring on my inside, something that was telling me it is time for you to really get engaged in what I had called you to do. Now, that does not mean that our years at Glad Tidings was futile or not necessary. As a matter of fact, we would never have been able to do what God had done through us if that were not the case. So we had the stirring, and after 15 years, I felt that God really, really wanted us to go back to South Africa and come back and forth between the two nations, and then further on to other countries and reach them with the same incentive of bringing missions and reality to them in a different perspective.
So, Pastor, you talked about being in South Africa and sensing the call of God, the stir. Explain to me what's that like?
Looking at it from the perspective being in South Africa, I came to the United States the first time in my life in 1978. That was a divine call. That was a divine moment, how I even got here. And my wife and I crisscrossed the nation for 13 weeks in 1978. I had encounters with God during that time that I can't even begin to explain. It was unbelievable. I can remember driving through the Yuma Desert and being so aware of the presence of God that I did not even want to turn to the right because I felt like I was in the car with me. And the revelations that he brought, and the insights, and the visions that were born on my inside was just unbelievable and indescribable. And it was during that time that God said, the day will come that I will bring you to this nation, but not now. Well, I had no idea when God said that it will take about another 8 years. Because sometimes when God speaks to us prophetically, whether it be God speaking to us directly or through a prophet, many times we listen to the words of in this season or tomorrow or very soon. And we think in this season means, well, summer, this summer, in this, or winter, or whatever it may be, or tomorrow, in this time. And we don't realize that does not actually mean in this season or in this time. There may be a longer season than we anticipate. And it took 8 years before we finally got the release. Between our first visit and actually coming here, obviously, we had come back to the U.S. on many, many occasions and built a network of very good contacts with pastors and churches and leaders across the nation. So when finally, 8 years later, I just sensed, I knew the time had come. I just knew the time. That was 1985. I knew that God is now sending us to America. Now, I cannot tell you the excitement on my inside. I mean, even also my wife, Ann, we couldn't wait.
Wow.
We were just willing to give everything away, not even just sell it. Just get rid of it. We need to get to our mission. And we actually came then in January of 1986.
So in the 13 weeks that you were here, that where God just began to pour into you and show you things, are you seeing 35 plus years later, are you seeing the results of that encounter, those encounters with the Lord?
It's actually unbelievable, Pastor Carl. But after I had been here for several weeks before Ann had arrived, I was here by myself for 7, then she joined me for another 6. But it was after 7 weeks, crisscrossing the nation, preaching so many places, attending seminars and conferences. I went through the Assemblies of God headquarters. They were so kind. They opened books and files, and I talked to people. And that night, I'll never forget, I was lying on my bed, highly frustrated. I knew the next day I was going to go on to New York. I'm going to pick up Ann, and it's not going to be the same in terms of a personal relationship, talking to God hour after hour. And I was looking up and I said, God, I don't know. I've got 15 boxes of material that they're sending home. I've spent all this time. I still don't know what to do. Pastor Carl, that night, it was like the angels turned on a DVD and God unfolded a church growth program to me. Architecture being my background, I jumped out of bed. I started drawing and scratching and sketching. And it was about close to 2 o'clock when I popped back into bed. And I was so happy. And I was lying there looking up at the ceiling again. And I think I just gave the angels enough time to change the DVD, because then the second revelation came. It was amazing. That night I did not sleep. I just got up, got in the car, and went on to my next assignment. Coming to South Africa, I now had a revelation from God. I had principles. I had things that God had shared with me. I came to my church and I I realized something had changed on my inside. But I'll never forget, while I was on the airplane back to South Africa, I remember that many people told me, if you're going to go to America and you come back, your vision is going to be so large, you won't know how to handle it. I came back, and I thought it didn't work for me. I just feel the same. I know I've had this mighty revelation, but hey, it's not working. Until that first Sunday, I had built one of the largest church facilities in our denomination. And that Sunday morning, I stood on the platform, and when I looked over the crowd, I asked myself the question, why in the world did I build such a small church? And then it hit me. God enlarged my vision. I started implementing these principles that God had given me. I wrote manuals. I designed systems. I almost day and night. That's all I did. Just seeking the wisdom of God, putting on paper what God had revealed to me, putting it into practice, implementing all of these systems that God had given me. And 6 months later, we had no more room in the church. One Sunday morning, my head usher came back there and he said, Pastor, we've got a big problem. I said, what's the problem, Brother Joseph? He says, we have no more seats in the sanctuary. I said, that's not a problem. Don't you understand? We all want a packed church. He says, you have no idea. They're still coming from across the fields. And God blessed us. And the church grew exponentially. Then pastors started flying in from all over, wanted to know what we're doing. I helped them. I trained them. Long story short, God then spoke to me and he said, whatever I have entrusted to you, you now have to share and entrust to other faithful men, which we did. And the result was coming back to America, attending many church growth institutes, and then establishing the first ever church growth institute in the continent of Africa.
What a fascinating story and call of God and purpose of God to be on your life. Talk to me about the nation of South Africa. I know that you were born in Zimbabwe and raised in the Republic of South Africa. And so talk to me about the culture, and you were certainly training pastors, equipping pastors there in South Africa, but also around the world. But the Spirit Wind International not only trains and facilitates leaders and pastors, but you guys also are involved really on the ground in South Africa with feeding and clothing. And so talk to me about that experience.
The spectrum of missions goes way beyond just one singular aspect.
Wow.
And missions also, you cannot really confine to a singular denomination. When you're out in the field, when you're out there working with people, you cannot ask them, are you Protestant or Catholic or Pentecostal or Baptist or Lutheran? If people are hungry, they're hungry. And if people need the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, you share it with whoever you can reach. Therefore, you've got to look at a much wider spectrum than just a secluded group, and also further than just preaching the gospel. Social scientists tell us that there are 5 basic human needs that all people have. And if we don't meet them, we will never reach the person. The first is the physiological need that everybody has. That has to do with food, eating, drinking, air, all those kind of things. Pastor Carl, you cannot successfully preach to a hungry person that hasn't had a meal for the longest time. That's why God instilled into our spirit, if we want to reach the people, we've got to feed the people. Because many of them have not had a meal in a long time. I do believe that many of them come to crusades and events hoping that there will be something to eat. And God instilled that in their hearts. So in our crusades, our open-air crusades that we had, I want to say initially, where many, many thousands of people came, and many, many thousands were saved and delivered and set free and healed. Powerful works of God's grace and mercy. But we also realized that only preaching the gospel in these crusades and not feeding them, we're going to miss the mark. So we started off at our first occasion. We ordered 10,000 loaves of bread. I don't know that you've ever seen 10,000 loaves of bread.
I don't think I have.
When you realize the average supermarket in America has between 250 and 300 loaves of bread on their shelves every day, and you multiply that to 10,000, you're talking about 2 semis full of bread. But I don't want to take too much time to tell you that story. But that first time we did that, I was still standing on the platform. I'm looking over this crowd. We come to this place where it's time to now share the bread. We want the people to be fed. We want them to be at peace. Somehow, word got out to the village. There is free bread available. That's all I can think that happened. Because when I lifted my eyes and I looked further, I saw people running, literally running towards us. I knew that they were running for the bread, and I realized they were running for physical bread, but what they really needed was the bread of life. Pastor Carl, what broke my heart is when I saw some older people trying to get there in time, thinking that they may be too late. I literally saw with my own eyes older people on man-made crutches that they cut out of limbs of a tree, hobbling along, trying to get there in time, some of them falling into the dust and struggling to get up. Now, obviously, we helped them to get there. But I realized that the need of man is so huge. And if you don't reach them where they are, you're never going to reach them with the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ.
What's it like, Pastor, to realize you have all of these tens of thousands of people and you only have 10,000 loaves of bread? You knew there wasn't possibly enough bread in the semis to feed the crowd that was there that day. What is, as a leader, as a pastor, as somebody that has a heart like you do, what is that like?
Indescribable. We did not arrange for police escort in the beginning. But somehow also the police got wind of what was going on. They showed up to rule the crowd, make sure that they're not going to overrun us. And at some point in time, I would call him the police leader, came up to me, and he said to me, "Sir, you and your wife have to get in your car and your team because you're going to have to leave." I said, "Why?" He said, "No, you can come back later." He says, we can tell that there's going to be a moment when you're going to pass out the last loaf of bread. And if there are a score of people that did not receive bread, they may run over you. And that's the time when you just realize that God's hand of protection is upon you. But it's an awful feeling. And because I thought to myself, what would it be that moment when you pass out the full loaf of bread for the last person and there are still thousands? What is that going to feel like? I'm glad the police had the foresight to take us away. We went away, we came back, preached the gospel, and it was just a miraculous breakthrough of the power of God. It seems to me that when that happens, the scene is set for a miracle. They're willing to listen to you. They're ready to receive what you have to say. And when you give the altar call, there is no hesitation.
My goodness.
They run to receive Jesus. As a matter of fact, in one of our clips, you will see how people run. They just run to Jesus, to the altar. They just run to Jesus, run to Jesus. That also, again, kicks in the next thing. It makes it easy for miracles to happen. Their faith is stirred. They're anxious. They've seen things happen. They've experienced the presence of God. Now when you come with a word of the miraculous, they get a hold of it. They believe what you say. That's why there are so many miracles that happen in Africa. They believe what you say. If you tell them that Christ is a savior and they see the response, and you then tell them that Christ is the healer, they believe you. They don't have anything to unlearn or what. They believe you. That's why so many miracles happen in Africa.
So you have taken the experience, the knowledge, the revelatory knowledge that God instilled in you 30 plus years ago, had shown you 35 plus years ago, and you have the opportunity to provide that, to show other pastors and leaders, doing pastors' conferences and seminars yourself, and not just in South Africa, but really around the world in a lot of cases. I've been privileged to be on some of those teams with you. And so talk to me about that experience. And we understand the concept of you took the revelatory knowledge and made manuals and actually wrote a book and about caring for people. So sort of help me to understand now that you have the information, you have you have the book and the manuals. How do you put that into the hands of pastors that may really need that?
Let me attach that to how that transition happened. When we had all these huge crusades and outreaches and open stadiums and soccer fields, I became more and more concerned that people were receiving Christ, but they were not discipled. I was reluctant to accept that the churches are really following up on the people as they ought to. And in many cases, there were not enough churches to take care of the disciples in any case. And the Lord spoke to my heart and he says, change your emphasis. Train pastors and leaders. Teach them how to reach the nation. Let them go out and win the souls and bring in the harvest and teach them how to disciple the people. And I connected with some of my major networks that I already had in South Africa. And we decided to change our emphasis from huge mass crusades to training and equipping pastors and leaders. The very first year that we went, we were excited with the anticipation that there may be 2,500 pastors and leaders. There were more than 10,000
My goodness.
that showed up in 4 different cities. And we have concentrated since then, it's been several years now, on training and equipping pastors and leaders and putting the material into their hands and multiplying it and duplicating it and training and equipping their people. One of the networks that was initially one of my contacts there, when we did that first contact, had 2,000 churches relating to them. They now have more than 5,000 churches relating to them.
My goodness.
It is exciting to see that. And much of that came from the revelation that God gave me in 1978.
My goodness.
When we became pastors here in 1986, those same principles were the principles we applied at Glad Tidings in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You remember, Pastor
Absolutely.
Carl. You were with me right from the beginning. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That first Sunday morning, we had 434 people in church, which is already a huge crowd.
Sure.
But if you take into consideration that the previous year they almost broke 1,000, you can realize that that church was in a difficult situation.
Sure.
But God blessed us tremendously. Within the first year, we had increased the facility from 1,100 seats to 1,500. We had to go into multiple services. Then later on, we had to build a worship center that could seat 3,000 plus people, so that place back to capacity. We had the mighty move of God for 9 weeks where more than 4,000 people made a commitment to Christ, and you were part of that too, all of that. And all of those things, all of those principles that we applied over the years were the same things we applied there. That's where I also rewrote all the manuals in modern vernacular, modern methodologies and stuff. It worked. And I started training and teaching pastors across the nation, districts in so many places. And mighty things happen. And it all stems from 7 weeks alone with God in 1978, crisscrossing the United States of America.
One of my fondest memories is in those early days. We didn't have a lot of technology. We had a printing press that your youngest son, Jace, ran, and I remember day after day, night after night, Jace would print a manual, and we would set out tables and collate those manuals. I mean, hour after hour, just putting them together. Those were some good times. I'm thankful we've come a long way in technology.
Right,
And
absolutely, absolutely.
so, Pastor, not only do you do your conferences and pastor schools, those types of things in South Africa, but you are even doing them here, right, in the United States. Tell me about that.
Yes, obviously there's a great need for material. Pastors are hungrier now for discipleship material than I have seen for a very, very long time. And again, we have written and rewritten training manuals helping pastors and churches to understand that every believer is a minister. We have got to get away from that traditional thinking that ministry is only done by the credentialed pastors. Every believer is a minister, and we teach that subject, we teach that principle, and then we provide the material. We put that into the hands of pastors and say, we're not only going to tell you why, we're not only going to tell you what, we're going to show you how. And we're going to put material into your hands so that you can train and equip your people to become ministers. Now, when we say every believer is a minister, we're not saying every believer is a pastor. We're not even saying that every believer is a leader. But every believer is a minister.
Yes.
And should be involved in the work of the ministry. That is the strength of a church. The strength of a church is not in the strength of the pastor. It's in the strength of the people. Many churches that are reopening are seeing somewhere between 30 and 40% of their people attending. Other people are just flat scared. And pastors don't know what's going to happen. How long is this going to last before the bottom is going to drop out? But this I want to say with all certainty. COVID-19 did not take God by surprise. And Jesus said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And for that reason, I believe the church is going to be better and greater and healthier when the doors open again. But there is a key to that. There is a key to that, Pastor Carl. People are now watching church in different ways, live stream, Facebook, whatever it may be, and they're becoming satisfied with that. But there's a caution that we need to sound at this time. Watching church is okay, especially now. But watching church is not the same as experiencing church.
That's good.
And we need to realize that there's going to come an end to watching church. And pastors and leaders have to be ready to do something about that moment when people come back. When our people come back, we had better be ready to release the presence and the power and the glory of God for people to experience church. You can watch church. You can watch different preachers. You can sit in your PJs and eat your sandwich while you're watching the preacher. But you cannot sense the presence of God. Watching is okay for now, but it cannot compare to experiencing. And this is what I want to emphasize again. I know I've mentioned that. Pastors and leaders have to be ready to cultivate an atmosphere for the presence of God. So when the people come back, they don't come back to a ritual. They don't come back to a denomination. They don't come back to an organization. They're coming back to the manifest presence of God, where they can sense God. You cannot sense God by watching on live stream or whatever. You can only experience it when the body of Christ comes together. That's why it's called the body. That's the only way that we can experience the presence of God. And once people again experience the presence of God, not intellect, not beautiful sermons, but like Paul said, when I came to you, I did not come to you with excellency of speech, but I came in the demonstration of the power and of the Spirit. That's where we're going to have to be, Pastor Carl. We have to concentrate on cultivating an atmosphere for the presence of God. And pastors and churches that are going to do that, there's going to be an explosion. I believe it's going to be the beginning of a great awakening.
My goodness. May God grant
Amen.
us that in the United States of America, certainly and around the world. Pastor, I could chat with you all day. But thank you so much for stopping by the studio today and having a conversation with me. It's been so insightful and enjoyable. And if you have been listening, watching today, and you would like to get in touch with Spirit Wind Ministry, Pastor Bosman's team is standing by. The website, emails are certainly on the screen. They'll be on your podcast notes. I know they would love to connect with you. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Maximizing Missions. We'll see you again real soon.